Folks, welcome to a very special episode of Going Commando. This is episode, I guess you could call it episode 7.5. My name is Brian Yancey. With me, as always, my co-host, James McDonald. How are you, buddy?
Doing good, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I'm glad that you agreed to this because I wanted to call this emergency pod an emergency bonus podcast because I watched. Yes, thank you for the siren. Because I watched, and I then encouraged you to watch a documentary this weekend called Some Kind of Heaven that I guess premiered at film festivals last year, but is now, as of this past weekend, out for wide release. You can rent it on YouTube and I assume other platforms. But I wanted to do this for two reasons. One is that I just found the movie totally fascinating, and the second reason is that it takes place at The Villages, which is a master-planned retirement community in Central Florida. And James and I both grew up in Central Florida, so I think that we can maybe offer our perspective on this that maybe some other people cannot. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's never lived in Florida, for sure. I'd say we probably have a unique perspective from people who live in like North or South Florida, because those are still vastly different than Central Florida.
Yeah, for sure. Central's like very much its own thing. You know, people. I always get the sense that people want to paint the entire state with one brush, and just assume that it's all old people and tourists, and that is true to a degree. Disney, yes. Yes, the Disney thing particularly grinds my gears because whenever somebody finds out where I'm from or where I grew up, because I always say like, oh, I grew up in Melbourne. It's like about an hour outside Orlando, just to give them a point of reference because Melbourne's not that big. They may not know where it is, and they'll always, like pretty much to a T, say something along the lines of, "Oh, did you go to Disney World every day?" No, no, we didn't do that. We did not do that. Stop asking me that. But, that's their point of reference for that part of Florida and that part of America, I guess, is Disney World. So.
In my, oh geez, how long have I been? 20-something years living in Florida. We moved here when I was 9. I've been to Disney less than 5 times in 20-something years. So I do find that funny. I get that asked that a lot too. Like when I'll take a call from a doctor's office or something, they're giving me clinical, and like systems lagging or something, and I got to make small talk, and I'm like, so where are you guys from? They're like, New York. It's really cold. How about you? And I'm like, oh, I'm in Florida. They're like, oh, I bet the weather's great. You got any plans this weekend, like Disney? I'm like,
yes, that's what we all do every weekend. I mean, I don't live there anymore, but I assume that's what everybody does because that's what everybody thinks that we did. All like fucking 21 million people who live in the state of Florida, the third most populous state in the United States as of this very moment.
And we all converge on Disney on like Friday night at 6 p.m. and just fuck that place up for 72 hours.
Yeah, you go. Yeah, we all go to Disney Springs. We park our cars for free. We go to the fucking Earl of Sandwich, get something to eat. Go to the Lego store, and then we take the bus to the Magic Kingdom and ride the fucking teacups, despite the fact that we're in our 30s. Like, come on, man.
Dude, okay, side note to this. You know what I do? Yeah. What I would love to do one of these days? I would totally love to go to Disney tripping on acid.
That's
I think
yeah.
I think that might make Disney really enjoyable, actually. Just like running around Disney with a head full of acid.
That would have helped the last time I was there. We went with Megan's family a couple years ago. Like a week-long trip. We went to all the parks, and as much as I rag on it, I did for the most part have a good time. But the day that we went to the Magic Kingdom, keep in mind, we went to the Magic Kingdom. We're all adults. There's no children with us. And it is so crowded. It's so crowded that day and so hot that I basically had a panic attack because I didn't want to be around this many people, and this was pre-COVID, as far as I know. It was a couple of years ago, so
Yeah.
yeah. But what I would say to your point is that you know, acid would help. I think doing that, and we are tentative. It's tentative at this point. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen, but it all just kind of depends on how this year goes with COVID. But I think we're doing the trip again in December of this year. That's the plan anyway. So
Okay.
uh, in that case, I if anybody knows where I can get some acid, go and commandopod@gmail.com. No, I'm just kidding. Don't email me about that. I'll go through the
Oh
proper
man.
channels. Let's keep it off the internet. I'll go through the proper channels, okay?
Yeah.
But
No.
it's a
No.
hell of an
No dark
idea.
web.
No, I don't even know
I don't.
how to access the dark web, so I'm fucked.
We talked about this on a podcast, and nobody ever emailed us or messaged about it. So I guess our audience is
No.
pretty vanilla too.
Yeah, it's disappointing, honestly. I kind of thought we would have attracted a little bit of an edgier audience by now, but time will tell. Time will tell.
We'll
Speaking
see.
of
I kind of doubt it. But go ahead.
but speaking of Disney, I think that this movie is interesting. Some kind of heaven in the parallels that you could make between a place like the Villages and Disney World, where
Mm-hmm.
it's a place where you, if you don't want to, you never have to leave once you're inside of the compound.
Yeah.
And that's by design because at the end of the day, the developers of the Villages don't really want you to leave because they want your money and they don't want it going to someone else. I would argue that Disney is very much the same way. And much like Disney in Orlando, it was basically, built completely from the ground up on swampland and has grown to this place where 130,000 people live there. And it's basically like a cruise ship on land for old people. And
Yeah.
I think that Florida's kind of become a meme to a lot of people in many ways that we kind of touched on earlier, but at the
Yeah.
same time, much like how a place like Disney World could really only exist in Florida. I mean, I know Disneyland is in California, but the Disney World Resort Complex is like a totally different thing, I think. A place like the Villages, I think, could also only exist in Florida.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I've never been to the Villages. Her and I watched this the other day when you recommended it. I was like, let's watch this, and she was like, okay. So we put it on. I found it on Amazon, so it is available on other platforms for anybody who wants to watch other than just YouTube. So we watched it, and we were talking about. I was like, I really want to go drive through there because I've never been by it. I mean, I think I've drove by some of the entrances maybe when I was out in
Yeah.
Orange County, but I've never actually been in it. So now, like after watching this, I think I want to drive through the Villages and just check it out. I mean, it's open. The
Yeah.
roads are public roads, so you can drive through there. It's not like they're gated and you have to have a passcode or know somebody. So I do want to check that out. Getting back to real quick your point about Florida is kind of a meme. It's one of those things that does kind of bother me about Florida is that I think people have this idea that Florida is the Florida Man articles. That's what it is here. It's like that, all the time. Like, there's a Florida man on every street doing something. It's simply not the case. Like, you don't hear about as much of that craziness on a daily basis. I think the thing is, though, is it's become such a tongue in cheek joke that people look for it now. Like, you could type
Yeah.
in Florida man, Google it, and you'll bring up some article somewhere. But I mean, I
Mhm.
think you'll compare like Melbourne, Palm Bay, like the Brevard County area is fairly quiet for the most part. I
Super
mean, I
quiet.
can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember any crazy Florida man stories. Growing up as a kid here.
No, neither
Like
can I. It kind of irks me because you brought up the Florida Man stuff, um, this might be a little boring, so I apologize in advance. I'll try to be quick about it, but I like studied journalism. I wrote for a long time, and the reason that there are so many Florida Man stories on the internet is because of this thing in Florida called sunshine laws, which basically allows journalists, reporters, newspaper writers, whomever really, to access these like records of these people committing these crimes, these weird crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Virtually no other states in America have these laws. So this stuff could be going on all over the country, and it probably is to a degree, a small degree, but a degree. But because of that law, it's so much more accessible to find these stories that are taking place in Florida. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And again, I think a lot of people also don't realize that a lot of fucking people live in Florida. It's the third most populous state in the country. And it's just the law of averages. Like the more people there are, the more crazy people there are, you know? Like there are
Oh
more
yeah,
crazy people in
absolutely.
Florida than there are in a state that's less populated because there are just more people, period. So yeah, I get a little defensive when people talk talk out of turn about my home state. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's on me, but I don't
But
know.
you know, but by the same token, like, yeah, you know, I think we both get a little offended, but I think you made it out of here, and you don't want to live here, and Danny and I have talked extensively about getting out of Florida. So I mean, there is a little bit of truth to the Florida man thing, I guess, and the fact that you know, well, maybe not the Florida man, but just like the retirement community thing. Like, it feels like there's only so much you can do around here unless you have a lot of money, or you
Yes,
like the
definitely.
water, or being outside and doing like a lot of outdoor sports. If you want a little bit more affordable entertainment, Florida is kind of a hard press issue for that.
Yeah,
There's not a ton of really cool, interesting, free stuff to do around here. I mean, like
right.
you can go to like the concerts, like like in downtown Orlando when they put them on down there. You can't get close enough to like an actual concert that's on out there that's supposed to be a free concert to actually see anything, anyways, for the most part. Um,
Yeah.
so it is a weird place, and it does have some other things. It's oppressively hot here in the summertime. I don't care what anybody
Yes.
says. So there are some things about Florida that make it undesirable, and there's things about it that make it desirable. So much so that apparently 130,000 old people decided to create their own community in the middle of the state.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's kind of the central premise of this movie. I think is it's to I would guess or just assume, and maybe I'm wrong for assuming, but I would guess that most of the people who move to the villages or choose to move there are well off. They've saved for retirement, and they're ready to live out their final years as leisurely as possible and have as much fun as they can and be as happy as they possibly can be. And, when you see the shots of the villages in this movie, it's clear that the developers like took great pains to make the setting of this place as idyllic as they possibly could. It's straight out
Yeah.
of like a 1950s or 1960s like Main Street suburb, right down to the fact that there's like clock towers that are like artificially aged looking. There's ornamental water pumps on the streets. They
Mhm.
like the architects like drew like artificial cracks in some of the buildings. There's all this fake history about the villages that was basically invented for reasons that I can't really ascertain, but I guess the developers felt like they needed it to attract
Well,
people, or
I
it's very
think
strange.
I don't know if it's necessarily to attract people. I think what it comes down to is like if you go up north, and I'm sure you see more of this, obviously up where you're at now than I do, but I know what it was like, living up north. Places have stories. It's like that gas station across the street used to be such and such's hair salon, or what, you know what I mean? Like something's got
Yeah,
backstory. Almost everything has backstories. And the people who are coming to live in the villages, they're coming from places like this. They're coming from like old, smaller and larger cities. You probably got people coming from like Cleveland and Akron and up in Philly and all over the country to
right.
come there. Right? I would say, except for maybe like California and some of the Southwest states, they're probably not coming out here as much. but people are coming from like up north in places where it's cold but has a lot of history.
Mhm.
And I feel like the developers probably thought that, like, okay, if somebody comes in here and like, oh, what is this place? Like, well, it's Bob's Cantina now, but before it was Bob's Cantina, it was such and such. And before it was that, it was a World War II bomb armory or something like that. Like, they want to hear shit like that because that's stuff that they hear in places that they go to, or they used to go to where they used to live.
Yeah, I mean, but again, like in my mind, that just makes it even stranger. Is the fact that they're,
No, I
uh, basically just submitting to this like fake reality in order to. I can't even really point to any particular reason why, other than what you just said.
well, yeah, I mean that's
Yeah,
really the reason
strange.
why. I agree. I think it is strange. I think the villages, though. So when you told me you wanted to do a podcast on this, I started kind of trying to really think about what the villages is, and essentially, at least my opinion is, it's a place where older people can come and kind of reinvent themselves in the latter part of their life, and
Yeah.
have fun and do their thing. So it is a fantasy world. It's intentionally a fantasy world, you know,
Hmm.
to give people this life that maybe they couldn't achieve prior, you know, in their hometown. Now they have the money, though. They can do all these things. They can go do all the stuff that they wanted to do prior, but couldn't do when they were younger. Which I don't know. That kind of comes across as really sad to me too. But I mean, hey, um,
Yeah, it does, and
I,
I think that speaks to that could be a whole entire other podcast about just the way that I guess capitalism and the notion of work and having to be busy and having to work hard for your family, work hard for your paycheck, etc. You know, living to work instead of working to live, that type of mentality, how that permeates through the country as a whole, and how it can really just zap the life
mm,
out of you if you let it. You know, and then like you said, you reach retirement and suddenly you have all this freedom. No children, no job, no boss, and I think if you've lived your life in a certain way for, let's say, until you're like 55 or 60, and suddenly your life is completely different, and it's by design. It's something that you want to do, but still it can be hard to make that adjustment, I think, for a lot of people. And I think that's what this movie shows too, is that there's because the basic premise of this movie is that despite the uh you know the veneer that the villages has and puts on for its residents, that it's like this fantasy land. There are people there who are struggling, who are not happy, who are having a hard time kind of reckoning with just everything that's going on around them in like a few different
yeah,
ways. So I thought that was
yeah.
a nice contrast.
I thought it was too. I thought it really kind of showed, the cracks in the armor of this, imaginary wonderland, which is essentially kind of what it is in a lot of ways. It's this fantasy land. A lot of it to me was really sad, and then some of it was kind of funny too. Like the one guy, who in his older years decided he was gonna basically just become a hippie and do all the
Yes,
drugs.
Reggie.
Reggie, that's his name. Thank you.
Yeah, Reggie.
I kind of wonder about that guy to start with, though, because he seems like, even when he was sober, he seemed a little off. Like Reggie, maybe he's got some kind of issues going on. I don't know what, but hey, man, live
Yeah.
your life to the fullest, I guess. What's funny is he reminded me of my dad, not the druggy part
Oh
of it, but
yeah.
like when he was arguing with the judge. I was like, that's
Uh
so. I was like, that's totally something like my dad would probably do.
huh.
Try to argue the point as to why it's not as big a deal as the judge makes it out to be.
Yeah. Somebody handed him the cocaine at the party. He's never used cocaine. It's not his. A guy just gave it to him at a party. It's
Yeah,
like an insane thing to hear like a man in his 70s say, but that's what he said.
Yeah, and the thing is, we don't even know how old that guy is. I mean, he did they say how old he was?
No, I'm just assuming. I mean, he and his wife Anne have been married for 47 years. They established that in the movie, and they kind of established that it's been like a pretty happy marriage for the most part up until recently, when Reggie has kind of started to go rogue a little bit and follow certain impulses that he's having, whereas Anne is like really, like plays everything very close to the vest, is like very measured and sensible, and
Yeah,
is like a super nice woman. And it's funny how they set this up, because like, when you first meet Reggie, you think like, oh, this guy's awesome, this guy's super cool, like he's like doing whatever he wants, he's like, doing shrooms and like doing weird sit-ups and like doing tai chi, and he's just like having the time of his life, and like, it's like very entertaining to watch, and he's very funny. And then the movie continues, and he continues to go down this route, and the allegiances, for lack of a better term, kind of flip, where instead you kind of see what his actions are doing to his marriage, and you start to feel bad for Anne and start to resent him just a little bit, despite the entertainment value of all the things that
yeah,
he's doing.
yeah,
I think about that. The scene where it's their anniversary, and they're in their house, and he just says, I'm gonna go into this other room and just jack off. Happy anniversary. And like at that moment, it's like it's just so cruel. Like it's so cruel. And like at that moment, to your point about whatever might be going on with Reggie, I was like, this guy has like Alzheimer's or something. Like something's going on. That's the only logical explanation for the way that he's acting right now that I can think of. But I don't know.
man. I have a little bit of insight in that, because of my job and everything. And I've,
Yeah,
I've dealt with a lot of people with Alzheimer's, and while I'm inclined to agree that yeah, that could be part of it, it might not be either. A lot of times when people have Alzheimer's, they kind of go back in time. Um,
yeah,
you know, like they don't remember things that happened yesterday or a couple weeks ago or even a couple years ago. Sometimes they remember shit from like 30 years ago. So
yeah.
a lot of them, if like they were really kind of uptight, they become really uptight and very kind of withdrawn, and they don't want to talk to certain people and things like that. Very seldom do they go completely crazy. It seems like the
Yeah.
men do though. The men have more like of an ability to go crazy than the women.
Hmm.
Women with Alzheimer's tend to seem, I don't know why, they're confused, but they're still very pleasant and just like like sit here, I'm gonna be back for your meds, and they're like, okay, dear, and they'll just sit there.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
it's weird. But yeah, there could be something going on with Reggie. He says when he's talking to the judge, now they don't verify this, that he went to the doctor in between his first visit to the court and his next visit to the court and found out he was having mini strokes.
Yeah.
So it could be that. I mean, having little mini strokes, that's definitely going to affect your brain. So I mean, that's a
Sure.
good possibility. Maybe that's what happened to him. But to your point, yeah, that scene is really strange. I took that scene very strange because it was like he was talking about how he was going to go in the other room. He's like, I'm going to meditate and probably jack off. So knock before you come in. And she was like, oh, okay. And he just shut the door. And it was like,
Yeah.
it was such a weird scene. And the contrast between the way he acts in the beginning versus how he acts later kind of leads to the point where I think there probably was something medically going on. And the fact that he's doing all
Yeah.
these drugs just kind of masked the actual root cause of it. You know, it's
Hmm.
very uncommon for people who are very, very straight laced to wake up one day and be like, I'm going to do coke and mushrooms and smoke a ton of pot and do all these things. Like people don't
Right.
do that. I mean, like
No, not really.
you have people that have like really bad glaucoma and they give them like, pot for glaucoma, and getting them to take that is like pulling teeth. You're like, it's not going to get you high. It's just, take this, it's for your glaucoma. I'm not taking any of the
Yeah.
marijuana. It's like, so to see somebody go like that, it's kind of indicative of something being wrong.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. Just that how, like, the aversion that so many elderly people have to marijuana and other drugs, because even as kind of the national conversation has gotten a little more, I guess, liberal, for lack of a better term, when it comes to especially pot. There's still such a stigma attached to it, to a certain demographic of people,
Oh
mostly
yeah,
elderly, I would say, where they don't want to be associated with it, they don't want to do it, they don't want to be near it or anything like that. And yeah, it is interesting in that way to see a guy who is like in that demographic, and I mean, we don't get a lot of backstory. We just get that they've been married for a long time, and but it seems like this is like a relatively new development in his life, which is
yeah,
again, like very very rare for someone that age, I would say, especially recreationally, I would say. Medicinally,
yeah.
I'm sure it's different, but
I think Anne makes a comment in there that he's always been eccentric, but just in the
yeah,
last year or two, he's branched out and got so much worse. So yeah, I mean that could be a lot of things: Alzheimer's, the strokes. If that's actually true, he was having strokes. I mean, there's lots of things that could cause that. Getting back to your point though, like the elderly demographic do seem to have this really bad stigma about marijuana, about what it is, and I think a lot of that probably comes from what they're told their whole life. Basically from the time they were born. They were told
yeah,
basically all drugs are bad unless a doctor gives them to you. You know,
hmm
and then you had stuff like reefer madness and all the anti marijuana ads that came out. It's funny if you really kind of dig into like the back history of that. It I don't think it's completely 100% accurate, but I do think there's some of it that's true. A lot of it sounds like that maybe pot was made illegal in the U.S. basically because people didn't want to change. They'd already spent money on certain technologies and didn't want to upgrade things. Have you ever heard the whole story
hmm
about William Randolph Hearst?
no, I don't think so.
I'm going to paraphrase because I don't know the whole story and I don't want to sound ignorant here. But he owned a bunch of newspapers and stuff back in like the early
Yeah,
1900s, and hemp was becoming a thing. And it was like, okay, hemp paper is cheaper to make, and it's all this and that and the other, and people were starting to go to hemp. Well, he saw kind of the writing on the wall that if they went to this cheaper hemp paper, that he'd end up having to spend what probably would equate today's money to like billions of dollars to convert all of his paper, like magazines and everything, to print on hemp paper. And he didn't want to do that, so he spent. The story is that he spent tons of money on anti-drug propaganda to try to
yeah,
like get the votes to basically make it illegal. I've been able to find a little bit of info on that, but not a ton. But that makes sense. I mean, it all breaks
yeah,
down to
it
the mighty
does.
dollar.
Yeah, and now that all these states are, especially now with COVID, all these states have like shortfalls in their budget because of the pandemic, and even before then, they realize, like, first and foremost, like, this is a plant, it's mostly harmless, uh, as long as people are using it responsibly, and two, we can make a shitload of money off of this if we legalize it. So let's
Yep.
legalize it, and
Well,
that's basically what's happening. So
the thing is, like, I got into an argument about this a couple weeks ago. It was after the election, and somebody was posting about how I guess was it Oregon that basically made most drugs legal now.
yes,
You remember?
Oregon.
Somebody was like, "Oh yeah, go to Oregon. You could do meth or whatever you want." And I had to try to explain. I don't think they understood the reason Oregon did that is because the war on drugs isn't working.
Yeah,
We're losing and people are dying because opium or opioids is a horrible, horrible epidemic right now. So decriminalizing a lot of that stuff actually makes the usage go down. And
yeah,
the people who do still continue to use are much more likely to get help if they don't think that coming forward about their problem is going to get them, for one, jail time, and two, it's easier to come by. You know, states that
yeah,
have implemented like the places where you can go get your heroin tested and then shoot up there under medical supervision, their overdose
Hmm.
rate has dropped by like 80 or 90% in some cases.
Yeah.
Which I don't care who you are, what side of the drug argument you're on. That's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's saving lives. I mean, that's, if people are going to use drugs regardless, and they are, why not, you know, set them up for success, for lack of a better term? Set them up in a situation where, they're not going to kill themselves. That's a good thing, I think.
Oh, I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, the logical side of me knows that sometimes you're going to find people who are essentially a lost cause. They're never going to change. They're never going to get themselves clean. They don't want to get clean, and that's fine. Keep those people from dying under your watch as often as you can, and eventually, if that's what they really want to do, they'll make it happen. But there are a lot of people who don't want to do that, who get started on that path for other reasons. I think I read an article that the like 90% of people who are on opioids now started because it was prescribed to them legally, and then they got addicted to it. They started
Yeah.
buying it off the street when their doctor cut them off, and that's how, I don't know, a large number of the heroin addicts we have now got on heroin.
Right. Yeah, it's a shame. It's a real shame.
It
It's
is a shame.
the the fucking Sackler family. May they all burn in hell, along with the
Man,
rest of them.
well, I'm not going to get into it because we're way off topic here, so I don't want to get into it too much. But this is a podcast, and this is what we do, right?
Yeah, it is.
There's a lot. Like, you could blame the opioid epidemic on a lot of things. It's multifaceted. Like, you have doctors who were in hospitals and didn't want to get bad grades based off of patient satisfaction scores. So when somebody would come in and complaining of pain, they'd be like, "All right, well, give them morphine and write them a script for OxyContin and send them on their way." That was real big in the
Yeah.
'80s, like the early '90s, 2000s. Like, they would write pain scripts for basically anything. I remember
Yeah.
a family member who will remain anonymous went to the ER on multiple occasions and complained of like hip pain, and this person knew that there was actually something wrong with her hip, but it wasn't actually causing her any. This person, okay, it's a her because I keep fucking up and saying her, but I won't say anything else. But the thing that was causing them pain would show up on X-rays. So she would go
Yeah.
around to different hospitals and get X-rays taken, and they'd be like, "Oh, well, you need to go see an orthopedic surgeon." She'd be like, "Oh, I will, thank you," and they'd give her a script for OxyContin, Lortabs, Percocets, whatever, and she'd go out and get it filled, and she'd have like 5 or 6 active scripts at a time, where she had a couple refills, and she was selling them and taking
Yeah.
them, and it was easy, and as it started to get harder, that's what ended up creating the big heroin push we have now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very sad. It's very sad to see people, fall into those patterns that, in many cases there's not really anyone there to help them. So hopefully that changes soon. And speaking of people who need help, I want to talk about Dennis
Oh
in
yeah,
this movie, Some Kind of Heaven.
let's reel us back in a little bit and get
So
back to that guy.
so Dennis is 81 years old. He's a bachelor, seemingly a lifelong bachelor, I would guess. Has a propensity and deep love for like Hawaiian party shirts.
Mm.
But he does not live in the villages. He lives in a van adjacent to the villages that he parks just outside of the village grounds, in the hopes
down by the village.
that yeah,
He's
living in a van down by the villages. In the hopes that one day he will sneak in, which he does every single day, and basically charm the pants off, figuratively and literally, a rich woman. And he's very clear about this, both to the documentarians and to the women that he interacts with. It's like, like the audacity on this guy is like really something. And when you first meet him, it's interesting because he's like a pretty good looking guy. He's like really tan. He's got a full head of hair, you know, and he's like super soft spoken and like obviously charming. And then, you know, he kind of like lays out what he's trying to do. He's like basically a pickup artist at 81.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like a little sleazy at first, I would say, but you know, as the movie goes on and his narrative kind of continues in the movie, you know, there's a sadness to it because you know, he's been basically on the road his whole life. You know, he's from California and he's his own worst enemy in so many ways.
Yeah.
Because he and I can identify with this because I feel the same way sometimes. Not to the degree that he does, but I've definitely felt you know, like I very much value like autonomy, independence in my life, and you know, it's super important. And he feels the same way, but it's basically to a fault. He wants that stability because he wants a place to live, but he also doesn't want to be tied down. And you know, that ends up kind of you know, forcing him to I guess, you know, continue on the path that he's on, despite the fact that there are, you know, 100 stop signs in front of him that tell him, no, don't do this. Like, this is not the way to go. Which I thought was like super sad for a guy who, you know, seems pretty sharp for the most part, and
Yeah.
you know, has like a decent enough head on his shoulders to have such a large blind spot. Super sad, really sad.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I remember watching his story, and I remember like when you see him, I think the first time you see him, they actually show him like in his van. And I remember like thinking to
Yeah,
myself, like, I was like, I bet that guy's living in his van. And Danny was like, well, no, he's got to be a resident there, right? They're in the villages. And then the very next shot is him laying in a van, and you can see all his clothes in the back. I was like, told you. I knew something about the way the guy was like, just something about him looked like I live in my van. And,
yeah,
you know, like, then when you hear his story, he's like, because he does come across very sleazy and a little douchey because he's like, I want to meet, you know, a nice looking gal, somebody I wouldn't be embarrassed to walk down the street with. Like, you're like, whoa, dude,
yeah.
you're living
Come
in a
on,
van.
man.
You should chill the fuck out.
Yeah,
You should be happy with anybody who's going to take you in their fucking house, you
yeah.
know. And but then like his story breaks down, and you see how desperate he is, how absolutely
Hmm.
like he's just desperate, and he finds what he's looking for. He finds you know, this older woman. I can't remember what her name was. You probably remember because you're better at that shit than I am.
Nancy, I believe was her name.
Nancy, that's her. You know, and she for her age looked like a really decent looking woman. Seemed really nice. Seemed to be taking care of him. She you know, in at least a couple of the scenes there, she was making him a sandwich, and he's living in her house, and you know, seemed like he's pretty well taken care of. But even Nancy
Yeah,
had the fear, like she's like, I just, you know, I feel like he's a little keeps me a little distant, and you know, he kind of told me he's here for this. I get the fear that he's gonna just pick up and leave one day, but you know, it is what it is. I think she really saw like what was going on and what life was gonna be like with him, so she was kind of like, I'll let it, you know, let it play out and see what happens. But
yeah,
his story was very sad, and it made me really sad at the end when he decides to go back into his van and move out of Nancy's house for whatever reason.
yeah, yeah. No, it's you know, it kind of boggles the mind. But you know, again, the only thing I can point to is just that he's his own worst enemy, and uh, even at his age, you know, craves that independence, and he always thinks that you know, something better is right down the road.
Yeah.
Which for someone at 81 to still think that, you know, no offense if we have any senior citizen listeners here, but you know, that's you know, you got way less time in front of you than you do behind you, man. Like that's just chances of that happening are basically slim and done. But it's interesting that you brought up Nancy and her kind of disposition, her approach to this relationship, because one thing I thought about when I was watching this, and especially that part of the movie, is that um, there seems to be a sense of as you get older, especially if you're alone, you know, and I would assume a place like the Villages that is so insulated, kind of exacerbates this. That in a way, I don't want to say your standards go out the window, but they definitely lower in the sense of you're old, you're by yourself, and seemingly at that age, like all you really want or need is just like some companionship and like the person, like, you know, it's important to get along with the person, it's important to have chemistry with the person, but it's maybe less important than it would be if you're, you know, dating as a single person at like 30, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, again, like your life is almost over, and you know, I know that like loneliness is such a problem with senior citizens who are on their own, and you know, I'm sure these people are cognizant of that as well. And again, like they see a guy like Dennis who they probably know is like not the best guy for them and is not, you know, taking, you know, this relationship, for lack of a better term, on the same level that they might be, but they're just happy to have someone around. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that makes me never want to get old.
Yeah, man, the series, like the documentary, really kind of it was sad to watch, and it definitely makes you not want to get old. You know, coming from my line of work up until recently, you know, that's what I did. I worked with old people, and you know, it was one of my biggest complaints. I mean, working with old people was fairly satisfying, but I would tell Danny, I would come home, I'm like,
Yeah.
man, you leave work and you're like, I hope I don't get to that point. You know, uh,
Hmm.
I mean, as you get old, like you can try to keep your life as fun and active as possible, but eventually you're going to hit a point, you know, where y the mechanics start to break down. You know,
Yeah.
and you can't go any further, and then you're going to be, you know, dependent on others to take care of you and to make sure that you get everything that you need. And it's a depressing outlook and a depressing kind of future for a lot of people. Some people flourish in it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen people living, you know, I've had patients that were living in some of the facilities that absolutely just love their life. I remember I had this one old guy. Oh God, he'd get up every morning, and the CNA would come in and take him and help him bath. He could stand and walk and everything a little bit, but he had himself a little one of those little scooters, you know, and it was all decked
Sure.
out, had a lot of gold trim on it and stuff, and all this really gaudy looking stuff that you know, an 80 something year old man would think was looking really cool. And he would he'd get his bath, he'd come in there, he'd get dressed every day, slacks, he'd have a t-shirt, tie, you know, like a shirt and a vest, put a vest on, had a hat, he'd get in that, spritz some cologne, and he'd roll down to the diner for breakfast. And he was just chatting
Hmm.
up all the single women in there. They were all at a table, just
Sure.
hanging around him, and he was just chatting and making jokes, and they were laughing. And I was like, that dude fucking got it. Like, at 86 or 87,
Yeah.
however he was, like, he's fucking got it. And, you know, he loved every bit of the life he had left. Some people, when they get that old, they were just miserable motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And I feel like you
No,
see
it's true. Yeah.
I feel like you see that in this movie some. Like you see people who are older who you know, they're just miserable. There's the one woman, Barbara. Is that her name? Barbara? The
Barbara. Yep.
the
Yeah. She's the
young,
other kind of main character, for lack of a better term.
you know, she's living in the villages, but she's also working in the administrative for like an old folks home. I don't know if it's an old folks home in the
Yeah.
villages or how that works out. They never really tell you. I'm sure they have a like a long term care facility inside the villages. You would think they would. I mean,
Probably.
if they don't, why don't they? Because they're missing out on a huge business opportunity there. But
Mm.
you know, she works there, so she's going to work every day. She's still living in the area where she works, but I'm sure that that also makes things weird. You know, like I live in the villages, I work in the villages, but she's still retired age. It's just I don't know. It's a weird.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Her story is especially sad to me because you know she moved to the villages with her husband, and then her husband passed away, and financially, she could not, like, she really wants to go, she really wants to move out of the villages and move back to Massachusetts where she's from, and she says that in the movie. But she's like financially hamstrung because of her husband's death and basically can't afford to leave. So she's at retirement age, but she's still working full time, and she's alone. She doesn't have any friends really, and she's just by herself, working full time and not really able to enjoy kind of the fruits of leisure that a place like the Villages offers to most of its residents who live there. And you know it's very obvious that she's still grieving while this movie is being filmed, and she's a little shy, a little reserved, doesn't really participate in like the myriad of like clubs and like things like recreational activities that are available there, at
Yeah.
least not right off the bat. And it's just devastating, man. It just sucks. I feel so bad for her because she clearly loved her husband to death and doesn't have anybody anymore. And that's just to kind of like live out your existence like that, and then kind of I guess force yourself, because you really don't have a choice, I guess, in a way, to kind of force yourself to kind of like come out of your shell a little bit and try to enjoy what's around you as much as you can, within your it's tough because you can tell like when she's, because like she meets like Lynn, the golf cart salesman, and they kind of hit it off, and he's like really affable and outgoing and nice, and she's not, but she likes him because he's so different from her, I think. And it she kind of thinks that it's going to go somewhere that it doesn't really end up going. And I don't know if like he really realized that she felt that way. Maybe she didn't say anything to him about it, or I don't know. But to see her go through all of that, and then towards the end of the movie she kind of does come out of her shell a little bit. You see her at the acting class, and she's a really good actor. She's like reading these lines like really convincingly. So there's like a little bit of redemption there in a way, but it's still it's still like it's a very sad story painted against like a very bright and fun backdrop, which I guess really this whole movie is like that, but her story especially is like that.
Yeah. No, I'll agree with that. Everybody's story in this is really weird and just strange. And to that, it kind of paints the picture of how strange a place like the Villages really kind of is.
Yeah,
It's this engineered place that's supposed to be perfect, like a one size fits all retirement, community for old people in their twilight, but it's not. The life they're selling is okay for some. For some, it's going to be boring and oppressive, and I don't know. It's just weird. Going back to what we were saying earlier, it all feels fake. It's a fantasy world. I think that's
yeah,
one of the people. It might be Anne, Reggie's wife, who says like, we have all this and that, but it's a fantasy. It's fake. Like she's in her 70s presumably or wherever, and she realizes like, yeah, this is all fake. Like it's all fantasy. It's not real. People are struggling here. Some people aren't, but it's just it's weird. I mean, I don't know how I feel about it after watching the documentary. If I feel like a place like the Villages is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know.
yeah. I couldn't tell you. I mean, it's I think it's hard for us to say because we're not in the demographic, both age wise and also like politically, because obviously it's like it's like a big campaigning ground now for Republican candidates like presidents, senators, whoever, just because of the population there. But I mean, this movie, what I will say about it is it is decidedly apolitical. There's no mind paid to these people and how they vote or who they voted for, which I think is the way to go, the right way to go about it. Just because I think a lot of people would come into this movie not knowing anything about it, but their only reference point of the Villages being like, oh, Trump campaigns there, or like Sarah Palin goes there, or whoever, and they're expecting some kind of hit piece, right, that will confirm whatever they think already about this place without really knowing much about it. And what you really get instead is like a very, human portrait of this place that is so fake. And again, to your point, Fantasyland that Anne brought up, she's the only sensible person in this movie, it seems like, in some ways. So I thought that was interesting too, because I kind of expected like, a little bit of that to a degree, but I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't really there, because it doesn't really need to be there, because everybody knows
Yeah,
that stuff already.
yeah. We didn't need like we didn't need for the documentary to talk about people's political beliefs or anything like that. And I'm glad that they didn't touch upon any of that. Although I'm sure there's probably footage in there that got edited out where somebody says something political. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a documentary with people who are largely 70 plus, so I'm sure somebody had something to say somewhere on all that filming. But all that being said, the
Hmm.
fact that they kept it out, and let the film kind of play out and focus on, like you said, the human nature of it, and just people living their lives, and how they live their lives and interact with other people there. It was a super interesting documentary. I'm really glad I watched it. I thought it was really weird, and it paints a really surreal life in the villages. I would kind of be curious to find out how many people have similar lives to like Reggie or I'm sorry, what's the other guy's name again? Shit, I can't think of it.
Dennis.
Dennis, yes. You said Donald earlier for Donald Trump, and I was like, Donald? I knew it begins with a D. Dennis.
No, he's moving there tomorrow, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I don't think they'd have him. No,
No.
well, they probably would. Who am I kidding? It's a weird lifestyle there, and I'd kind of be interested to find out how many people have stories similar to Dennis and Reggie. How many 70-year-old guys are out there now who were, living like a white shirt, black tie lifestyle for years, who are like, I'm going to try some pot or some whatever.
Yeah.
Like, Reggie was the only one we saw driving a golf cart in the early morning hours, shirtless on the golf course. But I mean, I'm sure that shit happened.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other people out there who are just
I'm sure it does too.
just as crazy. So I'd kind of like to see. I'd be curious to see what kind of lives are out there. I think they probably picked those people because those were the only ones that would let them follow them around like that. Is my guess, or probably two of the only ones.
Yeah,
Who knows?
for sure.
Maybe there's some other really crazy footage. But I thought it was well done, and it does paint a really weird picture of the villages that I had never really seen before.
Yeah. Well, the only way we're gonna find out the questions that you have is that you and I gotta come down, and we gotta drive through and do some on the ground reporting, on the ground podcasting, and we have to be very guerrilla about it so that we don't get kicked out and asked to leave.
You know what we should do?
So look for that.
You know what we should do?
Perhaps in the future. What's
We
that?
should hire one of those makeup guys who like did Jackass. Remember like, when they had their old man suits on?
Oh yeah.
We should hire one of those makeup
Yeah,
guys.
we'll be bad grandpa.
Yeah, we could get like some hover rounds or rascals, and get a bunch of liver spot done on her chest and some gold, and just tooling around on the rascals. Like, it could be interesting.
I'm ready to do it, man. I'm ready to do it. So let's put those wheels in motion. But until then, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up for tonight. If you want to follow us on social media, go on CommandoPod on Instagram and Twitter. Go on CommandoPod@gmail.com. And if you haven't checked out our most recent actual episode about Above the Law, check that out. That's up everywhere you get your podcasts. And we'll be back with, unless something else crazy happens, we'll be back with a new action movie episode on February 1st. So you got that to look forward to. But until then, let's say goodnight and Some Kind of Heaven. Can't recommend it enough. Super fascinating. Check it out. And yeah, that's it. Goodbye.
Night, folks.